fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery with your hosts, Eric Shapiro, David North Martino, John Copenhaver, and Al Warren.
Heard on KCAA 106.5 FM Los Angeles,
102.3 FM Riverside,
and 105.0 AM Palm Springs.
Welcome back to the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren, and I have a special guest co-host. It's Kevin Thompson from The Buzz on Z-Talk Radio. Hey, Kev, how you doing?
Hey, I am doing great, Al. Thanks for having me aboard.
Oh, it's always good to have you. Do you remember the Martha Moxley murders?
You know, yes, and in fact I do. It's been a long time ago, but I hear here recently it's hot news.
Well, Martha Moxley was 15 and was bludgeoned to death with a golf club in the affluent Greenwich, Connecticut neighborhood. Now, no one was charged with her murder until 2002, when Michael Skakel, who was Moxley's neighbor, who was also 15 at the time of the murder, was tried and convicted of the crime. And joining us today will be Robert F. Kennedy, Jr., who is the cousin of Michael Skakel, who says he was framed for the murder of Martha Moxley. Robert was named one of Time magazine's Heroes of the Planet, and was a assistant district attorney in New York City. And it's our pleasure to welcome Robert to the House of Mystery. Thank you for joining us on the show.
I'm glad to be here.
What made you decide to write the book about this?
Well, my cousin Michael Skakel was 15 years old when the murder was committed in 1975. 27 years later, he was never a suspect for 25 years. 27 years later, he was convicted of the crime with no physical evidence based upon the perjured testimony of two supposed confession witnesses. He then served 11 and a half years in prison, and he was released 3 years ago after a habeas corpus petition based upon the fact that he had ineffective counsel. His lawyer, who actually went to jail immediately after Michael went to jail, for taking the money that he was supposed to spend in the trial, spending it on personal accounts and not paying tax. Michael really never got a defense, but this cloud has been hanging over him and his family for many years. And during the course of my investigation, I've not only uncovered this evidence that the confessions were perjured, and that the corrupt police officer was obsessed with convicting Michael Skakel and committed many other crimes in order to convict him. And I also found the identity of the true murderers, and I was able to track them down and to interview. And those interviews are in this book.
Wow, that's amazing. Can you say who you figured the murderer was?
There were two murderers. One is named Adolph Hasbrook, and he lives in Bridgeport, Connecticut. The other's name is Burton Kinsley, and he lives in Portland, Oregon.
What was it that gave them away? How is it that you found them?
Oh, immediately after Michael's conviction shocked his family. It shocked me, and I went, because I knew that he was innocent. I wrote an article about his conviction that showed that he could not possibly have committed the crime. He was 11 miles away with 6 eyewitnesses at the place he was, and 8 more witnesses who saw him left and saw him return. I wrote this article for the Atlantic Monthly, which was an award-winning article. Soon after that, I received a letter from a classmate of Michael Skakel's who I had never heard of before, named Crawford Mills, and he told me in this letter, he said the jury got it wrong, and he revealed that another classmate, a man named Tony Bryant, who had been a classmate of Michael's and Crawford for 2 years, had been present the night of the murder with the murderers, and knew that none of the Skakels had been involved in the crime, and knew the people who committed it. I was able then to track down Tony Bryant in Florida. Tony Bryant is a first cousin of NBA Lakers star Kobe Bryant, and his brother, Tony's brother, plays for the Mavericks. He comes from a very prominent African American. His mother is a Oscar-winning film producer, and he went to school with Michael for 2 years, and then he moved back with his mother to New York City and went to a public school. And while he was in the public school, he met two city boys who he befriended. These were large kids. They were a year older than their classmate. He knew them only as Adolf and Burr. They were 6'3" and 6'4", respectively, 250 pounds, and very strong athletes. They were capable of committing this murder, which had a savagery that Michael would not have been capable of. He only weighed, he was 120 pounds at that time. He was a shrimp. He had 28-inch waist. Tony took the two boys to Greenwich on 6 occasions, and during those occasions they saw Martha Moxley, who was the victim of the murder eventually, and Adolf developed an obsession with her, and he talked about her constantly. They returned from Mischief Night, which was the night before Halloween, and on the train on the way up from the city, they planned the assault. He said that they were going to go caveman on a Greenwich girl, and according to Tony, dragging her into the bushes, striking her with a club, and then sexually assaulting. The following Monday, the three boys went onto the Skakel property and picked up golf clubs that were lying there, and they said to each other, "Now we have our caveman club." Tony got nervous because he knew that they were going to do something very dangerous, and he left 20 minutes before the murder. That was Friday. On Monday, the boys saw him again and confessed that they had committed the murder. Tony also spoke with a young kid named Jeffrey Byrne, whose house the two men stayed in the night of the murder and cleaned the blood off their clothes and their bodies. And Jeffrey Byrne, who was traumatized by the incident and subsequently died in a mysterious death, complained constantly to Tony about what had happened as a result of Tony's actions. Tony's mother told him she was very aware of the racial landscapes at that time. Greenwich had a notoriously racist police department, and she said, "You brought these two boys up there." He told her that they had murdered Martha. She said, "You brought these two boys up there. You are black. If you come forward with this, you are going to be implicated and may spend the rest of your life in jail. You can never talk about this murder again. And you have to separate yourself from Adolf and Burr." He did that, and he went away to school. His mother immediately sent him away to school in Texas. I finally reached him, and when I got a hold of him, he said to me, I said, "I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I am a cousin of Michael Skakel, and I want to talk to you about the Martha Moxley murder." And there was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then he said, "I've been waiting 27 years for this telephone." And it was that call and 6 subsequent calls. He told me in taped conversation exactly what had happened, the entire story. I then was able to, he only knew Adolf and Burr by their nickname. I was able to obtain a yearbook from Charles Evans Hughes High School and determine that Adolf was Adolf Hasbrook, that Burr was Burr Tint. I was able to track those two men down and have conversations with them, in which they admitted that they had been in Greenwich that night, and they admitted that they had been in the home of Jeffrey Byrne, the boy who helped them clean off after the murder. And they described with the intricate details the interior of that home. I then tracked down mountains of other corroborative evidence, including the fact that on Martha's body were found 2 hairs that nobody was ever able to explain. One of them was described as Negroid, and the other was described as Asian-like. And Adolf is African-American, and Burr is Caucasian and is described as either part Asian or part American. There was no hairs or any other evidence found that resembled anything to do with connected Michael to the crime. There was lots and lots of other evidence that corroborates Tony's story of what really happened that night.
So are you confident that Michael will receive a new trial, or?
No, I'm not. There's there you have a lot of entrenched interest, and Al can tell you that once a law enforcement system has a conviction by a jury, they're very, very reluctant. Prosecutors are very reluctant to admit they're wrong or to let go of the convicted person, so that the state has appealed the decision by the judge that released Michael. And that decision is now before a 6-judge panel of the Connecticut Supreme Court. If those judges deny the lower court decision, Michael will go back to prison and serve his 25-year to life sentence to serve out the sentence. If they uphold the lower court, then the state of Connecticut has to make a decision about whether they're going to re-prosecute Michael or whether they will prosecute for the first time the real killers of Martha Moxley.
Now, why, in the face of all of this, Robert, why would they be hesitant? I mean, you just presented, wow. This is a revelation to us, because before we came on the air, Al and I were discussing this case at length, and we thought we had it, kind of tied up with Littleton. But this is a revelation.
The truth is that almost nothing the public heard about this crime was true. And there's a lot about what happened that nobody knew about it, that I didn't know about, that I didn't even suspect. The way, for example, that Michael was framed, the framing was really orchestrated by the police, by the disgraced New York or L.A. police, former L.A. police detective Mark Furman, who played this pivotal role in the O.J. acquittal. He then came to Greenwich and played a pivotal role in the conviction of an innocent man. He was working surreptitiously with a man named Tom Sheridan, whose name has never been mentioned before in connection to this crime. But Sheridan was an in-house paper lawyer and advisor whose entire career had been spent inside the Skakel family. He was secretly nursing a seething resentment toward the Skakels. And he was feeding false information about the Skakels to their enemies, to Detective Frank Garr, who was the crooked police officer, and to other people who were opposed to the Skakel interest. And I show all that for the first time in this book, how the conspiracy to frame Michael was orchestrated and carried out.
Robert, now this evidence, I know this is probably going to sound like a stupid question, but have you presented this to the attorneys and to the police?
Crawford Mills, who brought the evidence, he at first brought it to Detective Garr and to the prosecutor. But since it did not implicate Michael Skakel and since it exculpated him, they ignored it. He then went to Michael's attorney, Mickey Sherman, who essentially did nothing to defend Michael and never investigated it and never told Michael about it. So they had reason to know and had the same lead that I was able to exploit to determine who really killed Martha, but they didn't want to know that, as I show in the book. They weren't interested in any evidence that put anybody on the gibbet except for Michael Skakel.
That is a shame, because I work in law enforcement, and thinking. Thinking as an investigator or as an officer, I would be definitely interested in this type of information.
Of course you would. And I worked in law enforcement myself. I was a prosecutor. And most prosecutors are honest, and they do what they're supposed to do, what their legal duty requires them to do, which is not to put somebody in jail, to see that justice is done. That's the unique duty of a prosecutor in this country. Other countries have mandatory prosecution. Anybody the police brings to a prosecutor, they must prosecute. But in this country, the prosecutor is supposed to stand as a as a baffle against the winds of public passions and prejudice and police enthusiasm. Oh, but that didn't happen in this case, and as you know, prosecutors have all kinds of ways of putting their thumbs on the scale of justice, and it's very easy for a prosecutor to sway a jury, particularly in notorious crimes like this one, infamous crimes where there's a public demand for blood or a public demand for justice. And in this case, you had a prosecutor, you had a corrupt police officer who was running the investigation and trial, and you had a prosecutor who had, with elastic ethics and huge overweening ambition, who saw this as a career case and who was determined to jail Michael even though the evidence against him was obviously fabricated. And in the end, he used an audiovisual display that swayed the jury despite the fact that nobody could ever explain how Michael Skakel could have committed this crime when he was 11 miles away with 15 witnesses to his absence that night from anywhere near Belhaven.
Correct, because they were dropping a family member off.
His brother, Rush Skakel, who attended Dartmouth, had gone to a early audience test preview in Dartmouth, Massachusetts, or Dartmouth, New Hampshire, of the British screwball comedy Monty Python's Flying Circus, which had never been shown in the United States. They saw it in a theater, and that night it was being played on TV, American TV, for the first time. Rush picked up two of his brothers and a cousin, and they went to the house of other cousins, the Terrian family, to see that show. And that show ran from 10:30 to 11 o'clock, or from 10 to 10:30, and the murder took place at 10. They had left at 9:30. And they were all there. They all saw each other, and there were non-family members there, too, who saw Michael, who was never interviewed by Michael's attorney, a perfect ironclad alibi. And, that's one of the reasons the judge released Michael, is because he said, the attorney never even spoke to the key alibi with.
Why do you think that Tommy and Michael changed their testimony so many times, like their story about what was happening?
Well, Michael changed his story once, and Tommy changed his story once. And, one of the things that I show in this book is every single suspect changed their story multiple times, and every single witness. If you're talking about a crime that was 30 years old, people don't remember what they were doing 30 years ago. Penny Littleton changed his story 6 times. John Moxley, the victim's brother, who was also a suspect, changed his story 5 times. His alibi was completely different in the end from what it had been in the beginning. Andrea Shakespeare, all of the other witnesses changed their testimony, but Michael and Tommy had very compelling reasons to change their testimony. Tommy said that, originally testified, he said goodbye to Martha at 9:30. He had gone out and made out with her in the bushes, and they had mutually masturbated. This was something that no 17-year-old kid would want to share with adults. And he was asked about what he was doing. That's concrete and hardened on that story before anybody knew that Martha was murdered. So, he had told that story 3 times to people who were looking for Martha before her body was found. So that was the story he stuck with until 15 years later, when he was no longer scared of his puritanical, authoritarian, and very violent father, who was, obsessed with sexual sin. Tommy wasn't going to talk about that, and he and Michael had the same issue. Michael had been masturbating in a tree, and he was a horny. He just turned 15. He was a horny little kid. That doesn't make him a murderer. But who would talk about that? Even Jay Leno said that most Americans would rather be convicted of murder than to admit to having masturbated in a tree.
Yeah.
No kid would talk about that kind of stuff. And most kids, 14 years old, are masturbating and doing crazy stuff. It doesn't make you murder. But it's understandable that they didn't tell the story the first time around. But Michael had been telling that story after he got sold. In 1982, Michael was very open about that story with everybody and consistently told the exact same story for 20 years.
What's your thoughts then on Ken Littleton and about all of his escapades and him failing the lie detector test and the way he talked about it?
Kenny Littleton was a much stronger suspect than Michael. He was connected to 20 other serial murders that all involved, almost all of them involved blonde girls the same age as Martha. He failed 5 separate lie detector tests. He appeared on several occasions but confessed to the crime. He was in and out of prison, in and out of mental institutions. He really undertook a criminal career immediately after the murder. And he had a history of violence towards women. So he was a very, very strong suspect. And the evidence against him was far stronger and very compelling. I mean, he was everybody's suspect for most of those years, but in order to prosecute, they didn't want him to prosecute. He was of no use to Mark Furman. Because Mark Furman, in order to sell his books, needed a famous person to be on the gibbet. And Kenny Littleton wasn't. He couldn't have sold one book by saying it was Kenny Littleton. The only way to sell books is to accuse Michael Skakel and then brand Michael Skakel as a Kennedy cousin, which, Michael Skakel was not a Kennedy. I never knew Michael Skakel growing up. No Kennedy knew him. I didn't meet Michael Skakel until 1983, which was 8 years after the crime was committed. I never heard of the Martha Moxley murder. None of my brothers and sisters were aware of this, and none of us knew any of the Skakels. My family, as I show in the book, was estranged from the Skakel family. The Skakels were carbon, oil, and coal Republicans who supported Nixon in 1960, Kenneth Keating over my father in the Senate race in 1964, and opposed my father's senatorial bid in 1968. And, my mother loved her brothers and sisters, but she had no contact with them, and we never met any of the Skakel cousins, as I said, until 8 years after murder was committed.
Wow. Yeah, that's kind of a surprise. I didn't realize that, because they make it sound like you guys all grew up together and knew each other.
Yeah, no, we didn't. Of course, that was part of the flypaper of this case that kind of, attracted the feckless national media, and nobody looked below those seductive orthodoxies, beyond this kind of thin patina to actually look at the fact this was a story that in journalistic parlance was too good to fact check. There were 401 reporters certified to cover this case, and only one of them questioned that orthodoxy and said, wait a second, this doesn't make any sense.
Now, do you feel like there's going to be some sort of issue with being that with minority tensions right now about accusing them too?
Well, the people who I accuse and who committed the crime, one of them is African American and one is Caucasian. I can't be responsible for optics. My only choice is to pursue the truth. That's what journalists should be doing. That's what the kind of lawyer that I am does. That's what most of us try to do, which is to pursue the truth. And I really don't see that I have any choice other than to pursue the truth wherever it leads.
Now that brings up a really good point, Robert. If you don't mind me asking, the Kennedys were a big name. Well, they still are. Do you feel that the police were soft-handed on them because of their power and their authority? I mean, do you think that they actually did the job? Did they do the searches? Did they go in depth enough?
No, as has been shown time and time again, first of all, there was no Kennedy involved in this murder. Where the Kennedys were unaware of this murder. It wasn't something that anybody in my family ever talked to. I had never heard about it until 8 years later. Did the Skakels have political power? No, none. Was the fix in somehow? No. And even the biggest critics, Frank Garr and Len Levitt, have said that is absolute nonsense. That there was no fix. There was just extraordinary police incompetence. There was 147 people, men on the Greenwich police force, and not one of them had ever been involved in a murder investigation. They didn't have police tape. They lost everything. They lost stuff that would have exculpated the Skakel kids. They lost the vaginal swabs. They lost the anal swabs. They didn't do proper testing to detect the presence of a sexual assault. They lost all the hairs that were found on Martha's body. They lost a bloody pair of pants size 36, which would have fit those boys, or Kenny Littleton. Michael had a 28-inch waist. They lost a bloody pair of size 13 sneakers. Michael had a size 6 foot at that time. So, there was a lot of police incompetence, and it goes on and on and on. It's detailed in the book. It had nothing to do with anybody fixing the police. They were just, incompetent.
So, given the
they lost, and among other things, they lost the handle to the golf club, which, when the police first arrived, they reported that it was protruding from Martha's neck. Afterwards, nobody could have explained. I think it appears that somebody just took it as a souvenir. It never ended up in the police locker.
Now,
both the first doctor on the site, and the police, the two first policemen reported being there, and the the photographs confirmed that. But, it was lost, and then at the trial, John Benedict, the prosecutor, told the jury that Michael Skakel had taken it, with no evidence of that, in order to conceal his mother's name on the handle. He said no other murderer would have had an incentive to take it, ignoring the whole science of fingerprint detection. Of course, anybody would have had the incentive, but he also ignored the evidence that it had been there when Martha's body was found, that the police had lost it.
Yeah, that's Robert, that's a revelation to me, because it was our understanding that the handle was missing completely from the scene. So you're saying that the police lost all of this evidence?
Yes, the two first police officers on the scene, Detective Hickman or Officer Hickman, both testified then and subsequently that the handle was there when they arrived with it, that the handle was protruding from Martha's neck with a leatherette grip, quote unquote. The first doctor to arrive on the site, said the handle by that time was laying next to Martha's head on the ground, and it was never recovered. The police just lost it.
We have not heard any of this, have we, Al?
No, it's all... Out of all the reading and stuff we did.
Read the book, guys, because, I think on almost every page of that book you're going to see things that you haven't seen before, and I don't ask anybody to take my opinion seriously about what happened. They shouldn't do that. The big pitfall of this case is nobody has ever looked at the facts. They followed passion and prejudice. Nobody has followed the facts. And if you look at the facts, there's no way that Michael could have committed the crime, and the corruption in Detective Garr's office is, should put him in jail. He should be in prison for what he did. And then you'll also see the strong evidence, which I think is beyond a reasonable doubt. Other people may not think it's that beyond a reasonable doubt, but I believe it is, that Adolf and Burr killed her. And when we tried to subpoena Adolf and Burr, they both took the Fifth Amendment. I've said publicly that if I'm wrong about Adolf and Burr, they should sue me. If they're innocent, they will. I don't believe that's going to happen.
Do you think they'll ever get prosecuted then for this?
I hope so. If they're, Connecticut is supposed to be the Constitution state. These guys should be in jail.
If they did it, I agree. But Robert, if I may, can I challenge you on just a couple of things?
Sure.
To put this in perspective? Let's go back to the handle. Now, what evidence do you have that somebody may have taken it? Do you know that it was there on the scene other than just reports?
I don't know because I wasn't there. I just know what the two police officers say to this day. Detective Hickman, who was the first on the scene, as not only was it there, he describes in the police report it being there with its leatherette grip. And he also has said, I went home and I told my wife at night. The sight of it protruding from his neck disturbed him. And the other detective on site, the first on site, said the same thing. The first doctor on the site, who declared her dead, said that by that time the handle was lying next to her head on the blanket.
Ah, I understand. Because from my research looking at this case, the autopsy report said that there were several strikes to her head. I mean, they were very damaging blows. That so much to the point that they couldn't tell which one it was that actually was the cause of death. But obviously, a golf club handle protruding from the neck would have been the cause of death. Why would they not have said that?
They believe the coroner reports all mention the punctures in her throat that were made by a golf club shaft. Mm-hmm. So that is, that's in every coroner report, police report. The question is, what happened to the piece? The golf club was broken in 3 pieces.
Yes.
What happened to the piece, which was the handle part, that made those, that made those impalements? And what the police officers who were first on site say, and the doctor, was it was there at the time that they arrived.
Yes, sir. And because I'm personally, and this is just us guys talking, personally, I still like Littleton for it because he even made the statement at one point to his wife that if they ever find that golf club handle, my prints are going to be on it.
Yeah, well, a lot of people are going to have different theories about this case. But what I would ask you to do is to read the book. And then let's talk about it. Because I don't think that until you see the facts, I don't think that, that anybody can make any rational conclusions about this case. It's all guesswork, and that's what it's been up to this time.
Yes.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. We really recommend everybody pick up the book. It's on sale now, isn't it?
Yeah, the book is on sale. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or, it should be in your local books.
Again, the book is called Framed, Why Michael Skakel Spent Over a Decade in Prison for a Murder He Didn't Commit. The guest and author, Robert F. Kennedy, Jr. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Robert, it's been an honor to speak with you. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure, and I'm very grateful for the attention that you've given me. You're actually interested in the facts rather than pathology. Thank you.
You've been listening to the House of Mystery radio show. To find out more about our guests, hosts, or shows, go to www.houseofmystery.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.